Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
There's a new hero in town. Nope, not that guy. Nope, not him. Not that guy. He's a hero with a dad bod. This father figure may not have six-pack abs, but he's got something even better. A heart of gold. He may love donuts, but he goes nuts for his family, whether it's helping with homework or saving the day. So don't let the dad bod fool you. Real dads are the true heroes, both inside and out.
Oh man, I love the conversations between kids and parents that I've heard about this week. So what's a dad bod? So you're saying I have a dad bod? It's what your dad looks like without his shirt on if he's over 30. You ready? We got some ground to cover in the next few moments. I do want to just say a couple of things. First of all, I totally failed to inform our mayor, Glenda Ledford, who was in last service, before the announcement that we weren't going to be in the parade this year. Yeah, she gave me the look and so I apologize later. There are actually some strategic reasons why we aren't doing that this year, but I want you to get a glimpse of what goes on behind the scenes with our staff, because the graphic you saw was not the original graphic that they created to let you know that we weren't going to be in the parade this year. This was the original graphic right here. No 4th of July parade, ungrateful colonials. Did all of that for Julia Bowles, who is one of our staff and is a Brit. Anyways, yeah, that's kind of what goes on around here. I apologize in advance. So, also, water baptisms. I just want to say this. You don't have to get baptized in a church building. It's not like more spiritual, or like if you are just chomping at the bit and you want to get water baptized and you get some friends together and someone who led you to the Lord or has discipled you baptizes you in a bathtub or in the lake or in a hot tub, I would strongly recommend go for it. But we are doing baptisms in August, and we're looking forward to that. We've got people already signed up. Lastly, if you did not listen to last week's message, Jonathan Garland, you need to go back and listen to it. He did an excellent job of setting this topic up. And really the first question we were asking in this series is, why does masculinity matter more now than ever? It's always mattered, but if you've been paying attention at all, you recognize that there has clearly been an attack culturally on masculinity, the idea of masculinity. In fact, I was sitting with my wife last night at dinner, and we were just talking about, and you know that we were out on a date because, well, we were able to talk at dinner because our girls weren't there. I was sitting with her talking, and we were just having a conversation about this desire or this need I feel internally whenever I'm talking about a topic like this to make all the caveats. Listen, women are important too. We're not saying women are unimportant. She was just like, you don't need to do any of that. I recognize that we need a definition of what healthy masculinity is. It's a topic we need to address. I'm proud of our church for addressing it. And whenever I hear this topic as a woman, I'm cheering and I'm asking, what are the things I need to learn? What are the things I need to discover? And so there you go. It's my wife's fault if I don't make a bunch of caveats and try and make you feel all better each and every point along the way, okay? But she's right. Because currently we have what I refer to as a culture of confusion. And here's the thing. It's actually a culture that is curated. It's been created. It's intentional and it's deliberate. And so my title today is Walk This Way. Because we need actually a model. Last week we were talking about why does masculinity matter now more than ever. This week what we're talking about is what is a model for biblical, healthy masculinity, because you can't call something toxic unless you know what healthy is. And when you give no definitions, then you should not bring any accusations. And so we're going to be unpacking this. We looked at this passage last week. I want to revisit it quickly in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. If you want to know what gets God all wrapped around the axle, what makes him angry, here's something. Chapter 1, verse 18, but God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. You hear what he's describing? He's actually describing that it is wicked to know the truth and suppress it, to keep other people from it deliberately. And I would contend that that is what has been done culturally. That in all kinds of disciplines, there is a truth that is known but deliberately suppressed because it doesn't fit an agenda that's being promoted. And for many of us, myself included, we tend to find ourselves in echo chambers, listening to people that already agree with us, getting riled up about things that maybe aren't the real issues, and finding ourselves all kinds of fixated on all kinds of wrong things. And yet the reality is that there is a truth that is known, that has been displayed, that has been made obvious, and yet there is a suppression of that truth. Now, there is this obligation that you and I have to speak the truth, but there's also this obligation that we have to speak it in love. You've met those people before, right? They're the people who are like, I don't know what to tell you, I'm just brutally honest. That's who I am. So you're going to hear exactly what I think. And what those people really love is brutality more than honesty. It's an identity they've taken on, a persona that they've taken on, that I'm just going to tell you exactly what I think. I don't know why I always pick Southerners because I'm from the South, but I just want you to know I'm fixing to tell you, I'm brutally honest. And yet what you discover is isn't honesty that's the highest value, it's the identity of brutality. And yet you and I are called to tell the truth. It is unkind to withhold it, and yet we are to do it in a way that is tender, compassionate, and loving. That's a good word, Pastor. I know, such a good word. Okay. Now, in the absence, right, when truth is suppressed, in the absence of clarity, chaos and confusion ensue. That's what you experience in a culture where there is the suppression of truth. And I would say it this way. When affirmation and inclusion become your highest priorities, you will eventually forfeit the right to think, act, and speak rationally in a culture. Because it will become perceived as though you were being offensive, as though you were being non-inclusive, as though you were being abrasive or non-affirming, and yet the reality is the most loving thing you could do is to speak truth in particular moments. To one another, but to those in our culture as well. And when we celebrate delusional behavior, we actually destroy our ability to think and express rational thought in our society. And it's something that we must be able to contend for in a compassionate way. Which brings me to anything you can do, I can do. No, you can't. I mean, this is an idea that's been promoted for a really, really long time. And yet the reality is that God created genders on purpose and for a purpose. In fact, when you look in Genesis, the very beginning of the story, it's intriguing that God, who actually chooses his own pronouns as well. Sorry, that was for free. Genesis 1, verse 27. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So God deliberately, intentionally creates men and women in his image to reflect his glory, and actually both are necessary. You don't have to diminish one in order to elevate the other. And when one is elevated, the other isn't by default diminished. It's actually both are necessary and valuable, and God creates genders for a purpose, and he creates them on purpose. And here's the crazy thing is we've tried to erase the distinctions as though it were somehow damaging to one or the other if one was better in particular categories. I don't know if you know this, but there are physiological differences between men and women. Biological aside, there's also anatomical similarities. We have legs and arms and a head, right? There are things that are similar, but there are things that are different when it comes to physiology. How many of you remember FloJo? Florence Joyner, fastest woman ever. 1988, she set the women's world record for the 100-meter dash, and it has not been broken since. 1988. Some of you weren't even born. How many of you were not born in 1988? Please don't. I'm just so old. Her time, fastest woman in the world, her time was 10.49 seconds. Listen to this. The fastest man in the 100 holds the record to this day, Usain Bolt. His was 9.58. That's 9/10 of a second difference. That's pretty close, right? Unless you put it in perspective for the 100-meter dash, because that would put Florence in 7,135th place among the men who have run the 100-meter dash. There's no medal for that. Men are faster. I know there are lots of women who are faster than me. There's even more women who are faster than Pete. But if you were to compare apples to apples, the best of the best of the best, it's clear. In fact, when you move on to the 400-meter dash, which is more like a distance run, but 400-meter dash, it's 4.5 seconds difference, which is like 3,100th and something in comparison. If you move on to the 1 mile, it's a 29-second difference between the fastest man and the fastest woman. If you moved on to the marathon, which no one should ever run, I don't care what my friend Wampa says. If you move on to the marathon, it's a 13-minute difference between the fastest man and the fastest woman. If you moved on to things like powerlifting, bench press, deadlift, and squat, and you took those totals, it's almost 1,000 pounds difference between the strongest man and the strongest woman. There are clearly differences, but the reality is faster and stronger aren't better. They're just faster and stronger. And somehow we have equated these things with value or identity or better, and yet they aren't that in the scriptures. In fact, when people ask me what I think about men's and women's roles in the church or in marriage or those sorts of things, I always start by clarifying, are we talking about equality, value, or are we talking about roles? And only that. Because when you look in the scriptures in places like Galatians chapter 3, verses 27, 28, and all who have been united with Christ in baptism have put on Christ. Every believer that's stepped into Christ, like putting on new clothes. There is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. When it comes to value, when it comes to the grace of God, the calling of God, the purpose of God, it is total equality from God's perspective. But there are differences in the way we display His glory. Men and women also have neurological differences as well. I know what you're thinking. Yes, my husband is crazy. Yes, my wife is crazy. That's not what I'm talking about. In fact, when we talk about the suppression of truth, this is one of the most intriguing fields to me because they have known for many, many years that there are differences neurologically in the brains of men and women that actually produce certain behaviors and desires. In fact, in 2017, Stanford Medicine magazine, Dr. Niro Shah, he was studying the differences between men's and women's brains based on gender. It was interesting because they only had 2 different types of brains to study, men's and women's. Here's what he said. At the time, this was not a universally popular idea. The neuroscience community had largely considered any observed gender-associated differences in cognition and behavior in humans to be due to the effects of cultural influences. In other words, what we perceive to be masculine or feminine is actually created by culture. But over the past 15 years or so, there's been a sea of change as new technologies have generated a growing pile of evidence that there are inherent differences in how men's and women's brains are wired and how they work. In fact, he's specifically going on in his research to discover if you did damage to certain parts of the brain, certain neuro pathways, would that change the behaviors and desires of men and women? And what they discovered is resoundingly yes. The desire to protect their young. You could do damage to a certain portion of the brain and actually eradicate that desire, but it's unique in women and doesn't exist in the same way in men. In fact, in the book, 4 Pillars of a Man's Heart, which I would encourage you to read, Stu Weber writes this: are men and women really different? They are. Granted, men and women, sorry, my iPad went crazy. Men and women are different in physiological and sexual ways. The question is, are they essentially the same in all other areas? Feminists have insisted yes. A growing chorus of both secular and biblical researchers, however, respond with a firm no. Furthermore, a growing body of research indicates that these very basic differences are present from conception. These differences are innate, not learned. It is widely recognized now that the very brains of men and women are different. It is this structural neurological difference that accounts for the many other observable distinctions. Women, for example, are generally superior to men in verbal abilities. If you've ever had a conversation about anything emotional with a man, you know this is true. In verbal abilities, men are generally superior to women in mathematical abilities. I've thought this several times as I've read through this. I'm like, except for around moose hunting season. And then the math in our head makes total sense why we should spend $7,000 to go kill a moose, and we could have paid $300 to just buy a cow. But, whatever. Women are superior in sensory response. In men, the brain's hemispheres are separated in function, the right side for visual skill, the left side for verbal. In women, these skills are controlled by both sides of the brain. One researcher summarizes the issue this way: in organization, connection, and function, the brains of men and women are appreciably different. It's overwhelmingly clear men and women are equal, but they are not the same. The differences in brain structure are present in the womb and recognizable at every stage of human development. Here's what's crazy. For decades, they have known this is true. For decades. From animal research in particular, they've known that they are structurally and functionally different, and yet it does not fit the narrative and the agenda. This is what we mean when we talk about intentional suppression of truth. It's actually important that you and I are informed, because we also are responsible for not suppressing truth in our relationships with those that we love and care about. Which brings me to macho man. Who was the wrestler? Macho Man Randy Savage? Is that what it was? Modeled after the luchador. If you've ever sort of thought about what is the difference between macho and manly, I think we actually sort of confuse those terms. I grew up in Oklahoma, northeast Oklahoma to be specific, and Oklahoma is a great place to be from. But I grew up in Hickville, cowboy country. In fact, some of the most famous cowboys you probably have heard of are from the little town that I lived in, or from that area, all the way back to guys like Roy Rogers, to guys like Lane Frost and Tuff, and some of those rodeo guys back in the day were from the community we lived in. And there was this certain machismo that existed. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be tough and to look tough? And sort of had these personas that went with it. And what I've discovered over the years is actually a very distinct difference between macho and manly. They aren't the same thing. And like it or not, our culture actually plays a role in the stereotypes that exist. In fact, it's actually specifically why I wore this not pink hoodie today. This is salmon, not pink. I just want to be clear about that. No, it's like you have to explain yourself if you wear pink right now. Now suddenly it's more manly to wear pink because I'm secure in my manhood. Like, why do I even need to explain anything? There are these stereotypes that we have culturally when it comes to what does it mean to be a man, and we need to have a definition for it. Macho is defined by this: characterized by qualities considered manly, especially when manifested in an assertive, self-confident, or dominating way. Now, here's the definition for manly: having qualities and characteristics traditionally associated with or expected of men. Isn't that super clear? What it means to be manly is that you have characteristics or qualities that are manly. Wait, that was my question. Like, what does it mean to be manly? I had a conversation here a while back that was rather humorous with a friend of mine who may or may not be in this service and sitting on this side of the room, but he was describing how he helps his daughters identify the kind of man you want to marry. And one of the things that clearly identifies that you do not want to marry that man is that he wears skinny jeans. Which I can't help but that all my jeans are becoming skinny jeans the longer I'm alive. He was actually poking fun at me in particular, but the reality is that doesn't tell you whether someone's manly or not, right? Like, how do I identify what are the characteristics I'm looking for? What does it mean to be a man, the unique ways that I express the character and nature of God? So I want to play a little game. I used to call this game Pick the Macho Man, but I think manly is a better word to use. So it's Pick the Manly Man. Are you ready? You're only going to get 2 chances at this. And so I'll bring up the first picture here. I want to know which one is more manly. This guy, all dressed in camo and holding a rifle in the woods. My son's like, it's golden hour. Let's get this picture. No exaggeration. Kuyu contacted and asked if they could use this picture. I've never seen it anywhere, but they asked, or else it was a scam artist. I paid them $500, and they never called me back. But this guy, or, I'm sorry, Dad, this guy. He did not know I was doing this. If you look at these two, I mean, it seems obvious to me which one is more manly. But you probably know what I already know. Hands down, all day long by a country mile, it's the guy on the right with the flowers on his head. Here's why. Because that guy, he didn't put those flowers on his head. He either let me or one of his grandkids do it because it wasn't affecting his identity at all. And the guy on the right, he actually put on camo also, but he put on camo and went to war for our country and fought with friends who died. He actually came back, maintained his faith, got married, had kids, put up with me. His kids love Jesus, and now he has grandkids, and now he has great-grandkids. He's been faithful to the same, I'm just telling you, all day long. It doesn't matter what you think the picture looks like. The guy on the right is more manly. And I hope I can be like him someday. Next one here, you may know these individuals, but there's a guy named Cameron Haynes, Instagram superstar, bow hunter, bad to the bone. He's just the macho man. Like, he's getting after it and he's challenging. You watch his videos and you're like, I'm not doing nothing with my life. And right, you read his books and it's just so motivating. Is it this guy? Is he more manly, or is it this next picture, this guy? Many of you may know this guy. This is Roy Roth. His family attends here. In fact, one of his sons was in the last service as well. And you look at the picture and you're like, well, look at how ripped that other guy is. And he's in his 50s. And look at him go. But he would tell you, because they were best friends, Cam would tell you all day long, Roy is the man. In fact, he talks about it often. And if you knew Roy, you know it's true. And not because he was more ripped or he posted more pictures or more videos or any of those things, but because he was authentic, because he was joy-filled, because he loved his family, because he wasn't self-aggrandizing or looking for all the fame and popularity, and he could have had it. And everyone would tell you, if you ever went on a hike with Roy, good luck. There ain't nobody tougher than that cat. Like, he can endure all kinds of suffering with a smile on his face and cheering all along the way for you to succeed. It's Roy. But we have these stereotypes, and when we look to places like Instagram and social media and films, and we have this persona of what it means to be a man, but much of that is just macho. And it has very little, if anything, to do with being a man. So what does it look like to be a man? And much of that boils down to our definitions of manly and masculine. And for most of us, we got that definition from personal experience. We watched someone, or we observed someone, or we saw how our father was, or how our grandfather was, or someone in life, a coach or someone, and we said, okay, that's what it is, that's what it is. But all of those models are flawed also. My dad, myself, there's always failures and flaws in those models. Do I have a place that I could look for a perfect model of what it means to be masculine, to be a man in the world? And I could see that displayed. And I would contend that Jesus is that model. He uniquely displays characteristics of the Father in the masculine. And I want to give a few things that I see in the person of Jesus that I think are worth us considering as we look forward in the days ahead. John chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. Listen to this. Now, when he, Jesus, was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. So Jesus is there in Jerusalem. This is big city ministry. People see the miracles that Jesus performs, and they're like, I'm on Team Jesus. I'm with him. And the crowds are coming to him. They're surrounding him. They're cheering for him. And here's what we're told. That doesn't affect Jesus one bit, because he knows what's in the heart of men. But more importantly, he knows who he is. Jesus is secure. He is not confused. He actually lives out of an identity that is settled and secure. I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges for anyone in public life or in public ministry is the craving to be liked by other people, to be affirmed by other people, to get amens when you're speaking or votes when you're running or all of those sorts of things. And you begin to believe that other people's responses to your performance is where your value comes from. And that is one of the most dangerous things to believe. And Jesus did not buy into it, because if you've been around long at all, you know the people who love you one day will hate you the next day quite often. That the fervor with which they appreciate you and cheer for you, the time will come where you'll say something offensive to them or do something offensive to them, and all of a sudden you are Satan incarnate. And if you hang your value on other people's responses to your performance, your value will always be in flux. Jesus knew what was in the hearts of men. It doesn't say he trusted no one. It says he didn't entrust himself to their opinion of him. He was secure in his identity. He had nothing to prove, nothing to lose, and nothing to gain. He could just be who the Father had created him to be. I'll tell you, man, there's nothing more important and frankly, nothing more sexy than a man who knows who he is and doesn't have to perform for everyone around him. In John chapter 13, verses 1 through 5, I love this passage because it displays something that's at the core of who Jesus is. John 13, 1 through 5. Before the Passover celebration, listen to everything Jesus knew about himself. Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He wasn't uncertain about where he was going. He knew where he was going. For he had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. Mission had been accomplished. Next. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. Jesus knows he's about to be betrayed, doesn't care, God's already given him all authority, all power. He's come from the Father. He's going back to the Father. He's not at all worried about it. And from that place of security, here's what he does. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Jesus is not only secure in his identity, but he is also strong. In fact, what he discovers is that if I know who I am, I could leverage my power for the good of others. What does it look like as a man to recognize you have power, you have authority, you have strength, you have leverage, and it is never to be used for selfish purposes? Jesus is strong. He is not afraid. I love some of the stories about Jesus. Think about this story. There's a woman who's been caught in adultery. And the punishment, according to their law, was that she would be stoned to death. And so they bring her to Jesus because they're baiting Jesus. We know this guy's all lovey and compassionate and stuff. Let's see what he says. Maybe we can stone him at the same time. So they bring her to Jesus. Jesus doesn't feel like he needs to say anything or create his argument, right? He just kneels down and begins to draw in the sand. We don't know what he wrote in the sand or what he drew in the sand. Some people speculate that maybe he was writing down names of people that these individuals had adultery with, like, oh, wait a minute. He knows everything. And Jesus pauses for a moment and he looks up and he says, how about the one with no sin? Why don't you go ahead and cast the first stone? This is so bold, so courageous in the face of religious leaders who have the authority and the power to put Jesus to death in this moment, and Jesus is not even remotely afraid. There's so many of these circumstances. When he comes to the temple, they have temple guards at the temple, but Jesus sees the leaders in the temple extorting the poor, and he is so wrapped around the axle about this. He makes a whip out of cords. He goes in and begins whipping people, flipping tables over. I'm like, that's my Jesus. Yeah, I like that Jesus, right? He has power, he has authority, he has strength, but he also is reserved. In fact, he's at peace. Listen to this, Mark 4, verse 38. The disciples are out at sea, and Jesus is just snoozing in the boat. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" We're told that the boat is breaking apart. Water is coming in. I don't know if you've ever been in a major storm at sea. I have. It can be terrifying. We're going to drown. I love this. When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Can you imagine? Like our now annual windstorms that come, that destroy the shelter logics that you bought, but you buy more and put them up because there won't be one next year. And to be able to step outside in the middle of hurricane force winds and be like, "Silence, be still." That'd be a great party trick. Jesus just, from a place of rest, a place of peace, reserved strength, stands up and says, "Silence, be still," and the wind and the waves stop. The disciples don't cheer in this moment. They are terrified. Who has that kind of power? Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. Who is this man, they asked each other. Even the wind and the waves obey him. I would say this is intended to be a distinguishing feature of men and masculinity. Reserved or controlled power. Reserved or controlled aggression. Reserved or controlled strength that men can uniquely display and are to uniquely display. Which brings me to the next piece. Jesus is strategic. I love this passage in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, speaking about Jesus and how he ran the race that was in front of him. "Let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him. He endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. Jesus is not listless. He's not hapless. He's actually very strategic and deliberate. He has the capacity to see the long-term objectives, the desired, preferred future, and he does not allow things in this current moment to rob him of that future. This is a real challenge for men in particular, because we are instant gratification creatures, right? We're on our way home. My wife's like, what do you want to eat for dinner? And then she begins to list things that we have to make when we get home. Why would we make anything when we can go and get a super healthy meal from McDonald's and eat it right now? But Jesus is looking out into the future, and he sees a preferred future which is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And for the joy set before him, he'll endure whatever is necessary to get from here to there. I would say this is an essential element for biblical masculinity, is the ability to pause long enough to look past this moment, this conflict, this interaction, and see a preferred, desired future, and then act in accordance with that goal. Here's the next one. Jesus is servant-minded. He is not selfish, and he leverages his strength for the good of others. In fact, he's talking with his disciples as they're describing how excited they are for the day when the kingdom of Jesus takes over the kingdom of Rome. Because then we'll have the power and we'll have the authority. And so the disciples have spent a fair amount of time arguing about who gets to be first, who gets to sit right beside Jesus and make all of the decisions. And Jesus is like, you have completely misunderstood what the kingdom looks like. He says, you are not intended to lord it over other people like the Romans do over you. You're just waiting for the day that you get to lord it over them. And here's what he says in Mark chapter 10, verses 43 and verse 45. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Servant leadership. It is not selfish. And it asks the question, how do I leverage the unique strengths and influence that I have for the good of others? In fact, fairly often people will say something to me along these lines because I'm in pastoral ministry, like, man, I know it's a real challenge. I know you're super busy. I know you got to put up with a lot. And I'll usually just like stop somewhere along there and be like, I said yes to this. Don't throw me a pity party. Like, I could quit anytime. I do several times a week. I could quit anytime and Jesus would still love me just as much. My family would still love me just as much. Like, I'm here because I choose to be here, because this is what it looks like for me in this moment, in this season of life, to lay my life down. And the same thing is true in my home with my family, but it's a deliberate choice that is unselfish and joy-filled. Those things must go together. And here's the last one. You're going to hate the last one, guys, because Jesus is also submissive. Just say amen. We'll get there in a minute. It's because we tend to think about this word as a negative word, and yet the reality is that everyone is called to submission. In fact, there's a rule in my house, and this rule applies across the board. I've communicated it with my girls as well, and the rule is just simply this. If there's a place in which dad is acting out of line with the scriptures, and you bring the scriptures to bear on that situation, you win. I submit. Right? Because I actually have to live a submitted life as well. Every one of us is called to submission. But in order to really model masculinity, your ability to submit willingly is absolutely critical. Because I'll tell you this, the hound of heaven is after you, and he will bring submission one way or another at some point or another, and it may involve some wrestling and your hip being dislocated for the rest of your life, or it may be an eternity where you bow your knee and spend your eternity separated from God. But everyone will experience a moment of submission. What it means to be a man is that I willingly submit. And Jesus models this perfectly. At one point, he says, I only do the things I see the Father doing. I only say the things I hear the Father saying, for the Son should do nothing other than those things. I'm following God. I'm inviting you to follow me as I follow him. And then Paul invites you to follow him as he follows Jesus, as Jesus follows the Father, right? It's submission. And we're all to model it. But I think one of the clearest places of anywhere in the scriptures, because Jesus possessed desires that were contrary to the Father's desires. To possess a desire that's contrary to the Father's desire is not sin. To act on that desire is sin. But listen to it. Luke 22, verse 42. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as he knows what's coming at the cross, Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. That's what submission looks like. In fact, submission is only required when it is contrary to what we want. That's the challenge of it. Listen, there are moments I miss it. There are moments you miss it. But the call to be like Christ, and actually uniquely from this position of what is at least perceived as power and authority and strength for men to model submission, is absolutely critical. Our ability to do that. I'm fortunate that I have friends in my life who actually model, guys I've discipled who actually model this better than I do, and I'm learning from them in these areas. So here's your assignment. You ready for an assignment? Listen, you gotta go do something. Here's your assignment. I want you to create a SWOT analysis of your manhood, of your masculinity. I want you to create a SWOT analysis. I discovered a few years ago what a SWOT analysis was. I'm a little slow, behind the curve. It's because I grew up in Oklahoma. But it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And here's what I would say. Evaluate your strengths. You have things that you're already gifted in. You already have capacities. It doesn't do you any favors to pretend that you don't have anything to offer. Identify your strengths. And then what you and I need to do in those areas of strength is we actually need to build on them. We need to manage them and maintain them, because what you don't maintain, you lose. Ask anybody who bench pressed 300 pounds when they were like, and now it's like, I can't get this bar up, you step out, you step away from it. It requires some level of discipline to manage your strengths. But the second thing is weaknesses. You must manage those and overcome them. And what it requires is honesty and intentionality. If you want to know what your weaknesses are, ask your spouse. And then don't argue for 3 hours with them about it, like I may tend to do. Ask your spouse, they'll tell you what they are. Ask your kids, they'll tell you what they are in their own terms. But find out and then be honest about it. Yeah, it's a weakness. And I actually am not supposed to just settle there. I'm actually supposed to mature. I'm actually intended to grow and develop. Too often we use this as an excuse. Well, that's just not how I'm wired. I took my spiritual gifts test. You know what I am? I'm a prophet. That means I tell people the truth. Good for you. You're also supposed to be compassionate and tender and teachable and humble and all of those other things as well. Don't excuse behavior because it's weakness. Be honest about it and then begin to mature in those areas as well. And then identify your opportunities. And this is so important. When you identify your opportunities, the things that you don't want to miss. As men in particular, we're prone to say yes to everything that we believe will promote us. But I'm telling you, in fact, I just had a guy in last service. He came to me. He's like, I missed last Sunday. I'm so sorry that I missed last Sunday. I wish my other friends would tell me that more often. But anyways, I'm so sorry that I missed last Sunday. I really should have been here. I feel bad. And I'm like, what were you doing? I was out fishing with my family. Stop feeling bad. What you and I are responsible to do is actually to prioritize, right? Spiritual life, being in fellowship with the body of believers, it should be a priority, but it's not your only priority, right? Prioritize things in your life and then be proactive about them. When you and I are willing to say, these are the things I don't want to miss out on, then there are things you will have to miss out on in order for your family to thrive, in order for your marriage to thrive, in order for your children to thrive. Identify those opportunities, prioritize them, and then don't sit around waiting for them to come to you. Be proactive, take the next step. I've got friends who felt 3 decades ago that they knew exactly what God had called them to do and where they were going. 3 decades ago. And they still haven't gone there. You know why? Because they're waiting for that one big thing and they won't do the next little thing that will get them there. Be proactive. Take the next step and keep taking it over and over. And the last thing is this, threats. Identify those threats to your preferred future. And I'm just telling you, it is the little foxes that spoil the vineyard. It's the little things that creep in. It's the little things that we allow. And I'm telling you, those little things are not little things. They're a big deal. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. They have an intention, and their intention is to produce total destruction and death in all of your relationships. Identify those threats and then aggressively neutralize them. Whoever it takes to eradicate that threat, because that threat is not satisfied until total destruction is the outcome in your life. There you go. I invite you to stand with me. We're going to take a look real quick at Psalm 23. Over the years, I've identified men in my life that specifically and uniquely fill certain roles for me. What I've discovered is that the older I get, the smaller that group gets in some areas. I'll give you one category that's really specific. It's a group of people, and by a group I mean two people in my life. It'll get smaller the older I get. But they're people who have been in vocational ministry longer than I have, who are still married to the same woman they married the first time, whose children love them, and their spouse loves them, and they love them back, and have had no scandal in their ministry, period. And surprisingly, maybe not to you, that's a really small group of people. And I've got two. I felt like here recently there was some barrier in relationship with one of them, and what I realized is I have to have those people in my life. And it's worth fighting for that relationship, contending for that relationship, because I actually need those relationships in my life, in real time, people who are going or have been where I'm going. It was interesting because I had the opportunity, Wampa was here the past month, be praying fervently with me that God moves on their hearts to move back to Alaska. Rachel's here in this service. No, they're doing what God has for them, but he's one of those people in my life, and I realized this older group, this other category, as I was talking about this with him, he's like, yep, those are my same two people. It's hard to find those people who uniquely fit that piece, but I need them. I need them in my life because they've modeled something for me that I need to be going out. I need to be able to ask questions and be held accountable and all of that. But I want to challenge you this week with Psalm 23. I never read Psalm 23 in this way, but I started reading Psalm 23 a couple of years ago as a leadership psalm. I kind of always read it as, man, I've got such a great shepherd. He's so good to me. And then I realized, oh, I'm supposed to be a shepherd. So I guess this is what it looks like to be a shepherd, to be a man, to lead, to provide, to care for. The Lord is my shepherd. What would it look like for someone to put your name there in the role that you play in their lives? The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid. For you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessing. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. I've read this over and over and over, thinking, what would it look like for my daughters to put my name in there, that I would model for them manhood, masculinity, in a way that they felt sheltered and protected. They felt safe and secure. They felt like their enemies had been vanquished right before their very eyes. They felt like they were led to places of peace and they were directed onto right paths. I'm telling you, it's a great challenge. It's a beautiful thing to pursue, even when we don't get it all right. It's my challenge to you this week. So Jesus, as we lift up our voices in worship, as we participate in giving in worship, as we just celebrate who you are and what you've done, would you remind us that you created us, men and women, to uniquely display who you are to the world around us. And would you invite us all over again to do that in a way that would bring glory to your name. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.